Hello and welcome, as always, to Language Culture and Dr. Lou. Today I have another video for you about the origins of some pretty common expressions that we use in English. I've done a couple of these videos lately, and these expressions in particular were amusing to me, the origin stories to them, just because I didn't know they came from such twisted places or such surprising places. So I'm really happy to share them with you today. And so the first one I want to talk about is the expression to get the sack, or someone is getting the sack, which we use today to mean someone is getting fired. They're getting the sack, they're losing employment. And so we are going to we think it's such a bad thing to get the sack today, but honestly it's nothing compared to what it meant in ancient Rome. And so this comes from a punishment in ancient Rome. Actually, well, punishment is to put it lightly. So back in the Roman Empire, in ancient Rome, they had some crazy laws and crazy punishments. Like, if you were convicted of a heinous murder, they might stick you in a bag, stick you in a sack, and then throw that sack into the Tiber River, right? So this means they were assassinating you that way. So that's why I said punishment was putting it really lightly. And so to me, that's funny that we still think of getting the sack as something terrible, but it's nothing nearly as bad as what it is. On the other hand, if somebody got the sack, if somebody was convicted and put in a bag, thrown in the river, that means they will not offend again, right? They're not going to be out murdering anybody else now, are they? But uh, that's a pretty extreme example of the death penalty, I guess. So that's where getting the sack comes from. And so this next one is not as twisted, and it's not nearly so old. Close, but no cigar. That's when we say that somebody almost did something completely and enough to get an accomplishment for it, but you just barely miss out. And so we say close, but no cigar. And where did that come from? About 100 years ago or so, in the 1920s, okay, there were plenty of carnivals. And these carnival games were actually for adults, usually not, I'm not talking little kids games, I'm talking adult carnival games. And the thing about those carnies is they were tricky, sometimes made the games nearly impossible to win, so made it nearly impossible to win a prize. And but what prizes were they giving out at the time in the 1920s? Cigars. They were giving cigars out, which in the 21st century, that's pretty hard to imagine, giving tobacco out as prizes to adults, because you might even be able to get yourself sued for something like that these days. But to me, that's funny that cigars were actually carnival game prizes, which makes sense though if the games were for adults, not children. And it's also funny to me that this close but no cigar saying comes from how tricky a lot of us think that carnies can be when they're running the little carnival games. Anyway, so that's where close but no cigar comes from. It's about how cigars used to be carnival game prizes, but those games themselves were sometimes nearly impossible to win. So it's easy, easy, easy to get super duper close, but ultimately fail in winning the prize. And so this next saying, stealing someone's thunder. And so where does this saying, or is it originate from? That's why you're looking at a couple images of the play Macbeth. Um, and so, of course, we use stealing someone's thunder today. If you steal someone's thunder, you interrupt their moment in the spotlight and they're getting the glory and all the recognition for something, and all of a sudden turn it into all being about you. And that's a real shame. We don't want to steal anybody's thunder. We don't want to take away anybody's glory for something they accomplished. And yeah, it's good to avoid that. But the first instance of where does the saying come from of someone stealing someone else's thunder, this was from an English playwright slash poet in the early 1700s. He put out a play in 1709, and this play did not really have a whole lot of success. It didn't. But the one little bit about it that the audience was really excited about, really talking about afterwards, people were buzzing about, were the thunderclap sound effects that the guy had used in his play, like the sounds of thunderclapping. People were still excited about that, and he could have just held on to that glory from that and hopefully reapplied the thunderclapping sounds in his next play if people are loving it. But he didn't really get the chance so much. Why not? Because slightly after his play didn't succeed so much, he went to see a pretty successful production of Shakespeare's play Macbeth. And by the way, Shakespeare didn't have anything to do with this because Shakespeare died nearly 100 years before this happened. Okay, but somebody else putting on a production of Shakespeare's Macbeth um, had a really successful production of that play. And when this English playwright went to see it, he realized, holy cow, in the storm sequence in Macbeth, these people stole my thunderclapping sounds. Like he was all surprised to see and horrified to see that they had taken his damn thunder and been using it in their play. And let's remember that the thunder, that the storm sequence and all of that was really important in Macbeth. Like you have the three witches who could actually control the weather to a certain degree, and Shakespeare did a lot about using weather to set the scenes and emotions and to move narratives forward. But so that Macbeth production got a big boost out of these stolen thunder sounds that they had gotten from the other guy. And then that guy would get largely forgotten in literary history, as opposed to William Shakespeare, of course, who, again, this was not his fault, but somebody was using his work and stole somebody else's work in order to do a production of his play. So anyway, that made me laugh out loud when I found out that the expression about stealing someone's thunder actually came from stealing somebody else's thunder, at least thunder sounds. And so, last ditch effort. This, of course, this expression we use when we're talking about you're going to make one big last try to save a situation or resolve a situation. It's really your last minute strong attempt to fix something. And why do we say last ditch effort from this? Originally, the last ditch thing, it was a military thing. Like you can see in the one picture here, you got all these soldiers in this trench looking thing, that kind of a ditch. That's what we're talking about. So that's funny to me that I hadn't realized that this comes from the military expressions. And of course, yeah, of course, it's been around for a long, long time, well before it ever came to America, but that's because militaries have been around for a long, long time. And so once upon a time, the last ditch effort would be your last stand of defense against an aggressive invading intruder, right? And so that's where the last ditch effort comes from. It comes from somewhere pretty grim, but still amusing to me because it seems a whole lot more, well, literal than the way we use it now. Like a lot of our idioms, such as beat around the bush. And so, where did the whole beating around the bush thing come from? And we use the term to beat around the bush today to talk about evading a topic. If you're not really fully confronting the topic head on and fully answering questions, you're just saying things kind of adjacent to that topic, uh, and avoiding really tackling it. This came from what to me seems like a super disturbing sport back in the Middle Ages. In medieval times, there was this really upsetting sport called bat fouling. And what is bat fouling? Well, it didn't involve flying little bats. It involved wooden bats, like the one you can see, like the three you can see in the picture right below me. Um, these are medieval bats. And so the sport at the time was they would go out into the woods and find birds and beat them senseless with bats. Yeah, I know, it's upsetting. But and so what is beating around the bush? That's because not all birds were so happy to just, sacrifice themselves and come out and volunteer to get beaten up. And so many birds were, of course, hiding or just sleeping in the bushes. So what the bat fowlers would do is to hire boys to go beat bushes that were next to, adjacent to the ones that the birds might be sleeping in. And so the boys beating on those other bushes around the bush that's the target would help wake the birds up. So they would fly up a little bit, and then these terrible bat fowlers could catch them in the net and then beat them with a bat. It was all pretty upsetting. So that's where the expression beating around the bush comes from, is actually literally beating a bush right next to the bush, right next to the original bush, just to get a bird to fly up so you can beat the crap out of them. It's pretty upsetting, I know. But it's to me, yeah, this is surprising that that was ever a sport. And the fact is that sport lasted for a very long time. Anyway, that's upsetting to animal lovers, but hey, that's sports and for you. Some of them are out for blood. Anyway, so maybe this one will be slightly less upsetting because there's nobody getting hurt or injured here. The expression until the cows come home, or we often say, oh, they're going to be waiting till the cows come home. Um, it actually comes from agriculture, from farming. And so where does it come from? It turns out that a lot of times on a farm, uh, the last chore of the day would be milking the cows. So you have to sort of to finish your long, difficult workday. You gotta wait to for the cows to come back out of the pasture, down to the barn, so you can milk them. So you were literally waiting for the cows to come home. Uh, just as if you're a farmer and you want your day to be done. Sometimes that was frustrating because the cows wouldn't come home until late at night or something, and you couldn't go home, go to bed, etc. But yeah, so that's where until the cows come home comes from, is actually literally waiting for cows to come back in so they can be milked, so you can be done with your work for today. And that's why we use it today, just to mean to wait until the cows come home is going to be, oh, you're going to be waiting for a very long time. pretty much, because occasionally the cows did take a long time to come home. So hijinks, that's another thing I wanted to include because it turns out that the jink in the singular, not jinx plural, but jink in the singular, that's been for I think a couple hundred years now a Scottish slang word. A jink is a really quick movement, like if somebody runs up really, really fast, and they might even, especially with sharp changes in direction along the way. That was a jink. But that's not where this expression hijinks necessarily comes from. And I find it a little, yeah, a little twisted where this thing comes from. Not a very nice place. It was a parlor game once upon a time. There was this parlor game um, known as hijinks. And what was hijinks? In my opinion, it's even worse, even more embarrassing than truth or dare. Because what you would do for hijinks is you do a roll of the dice, and the roll of the dice would decide who is the victim for this round of hijinks. And so the victim, chosen by the dice, they had no real choice about this. They would be required to do something super embarrassing, like make a total ass out of themselves, something ridiculously humiliating, all for the amusement of everybody else. And so it's kind of like if you're playing truth or dare and you always have to pick dare, and every single dare is super embarrassing and it will make a fool out of you. Anyway, so that's what hijinks comes from. And that's probably why we use the expression today to talk about hijinks are a practical joke, you know? And so we're you really yeah, it's really got the same idea of hijinks are going to embarrass somebody pretty bad. They're going to humiliate them. And but it used to be worse. It used to be a whole part of their game with dice, not a drinking game, but a part of parlor game. Because I know there's also a hijinks drinking game these days. That's not the one I'm talking about. But it was a game where you could get picked by a roll of the dice to have to do something super duper embarrassing. And these people consider themselves classy. That's funny. And so, in the nick of time, this one is kind of funny because I don't know if you've ever noticed, but if you Google nick of time, uh, you got a lot of things about famous guys named Nick, like Nick Jonas, for instance, and other Nicks anyway. But that's not what it's about. There's nobody named Nick. And actually, where this goes to, and we mean something was, we often hear just in the nick of time when something was just, it just happened at the last moment, right before the final deadline would have happened, right at the final moment in the nick of time. And so why the nick of time, even though nobody has ever heard of a nick as a measurement of time? Where this goes back to is these things called tally sticks that used to be used to keep track of things. And a tally stick, how you would keep track of how many of something you had, whether it be a measurement of time, be it like days you're measuring or weeks or whatever, or whether it be you're keeping score for something or just keeping track of how much money has been paid, whatever. Lots of things you can measure with this. You would use a tally stick. So this tally stick, you can see these are pretty old German tally sticks in the picture here. The nick, each nick is each little notch put on the tally stick. See, every nick was one unit of something, of whatever the thing it was you were measuring. A nick was one unit of it. And so that to me is funny that this expression in the nick of time comes from using sticks and making matches and sticks to make measures of things, that was a long time ago. Because we have much better ways to measure things now, but that's where the expression comes from. And to me, it's funny because that doesn't seem like a good way to measure time at all, but hey, to each his own. Anyway, so the next expression is under the weather. And this comes from how sailing ships, like the one you can see here, were in really stormy weather. Other oftentimes the water gets really turbulent, and anybody who was starting to get seasick, the sailors getting seasick from the turbulent ocean and all that, they would have to go down to a deck below, which was under what was called the weather bow. So it went from being going under the weather bow, which is where people would go during bad weather if they're feeling seasick up top. And so literally they were under the bad weather when we started this expression under the weather, and it's actually about feeling seasick originally, feeling totally seasick, which means we have more or less maintained a lot of the core of its meaning when we use it these days to just say under the weather. If you're feeling under the weather, you're feeling a little run down, a little sick. Not necessarily seasick, but still a little sick. Um, and that to me is kind of funny because I had no idea that the origins of this one were nautical and it had to do with sailing. But it started out as under the weather bow, which it was a part of the boat, which was for bad weather, and then just turned into under the weather. And there you go. And so the one most surprising origin I learned was for the apple of your eye. And by most surprising, it originated in a way that was very different than the way that I had thought it had originated. I thought when we're talking about if someone is the apple of your eye, they're looking like a beautiful, delicious apple to you, like so great. But no, has nothing to do with that. Comes from really shoddy science long, long time ago. Like, and I'm talking about science about the eyes and vision and the eyeballs and all that. What they called the pupil, that little black round thing in the middle at the time, was the apple. So that's what you were calling someone. If you tell someone that if you refer to somebody as the apple of your eye, you're saying that they're like your pupil, like that they're as important to you as the pupil in your eyeball. And that's because way back when, like I said, bad science as far as vision goes. And so they didn't have the corrective surgeries and not such great corrective lenses. So it was super important to maintain your eyesight better. And so giving somebody the same importance as your pupil in your eye, that is heck of a lot of glory that you're giving them and a lot of importance that you're assigning to them. So that's why kind of makes sense the way we use it today. If you say someone is the apple of your eye, it means you very much love and respect them and they're very important to you. And so thank you so much for watching my video. I so appreciate it to everybody who watches my video, especially until the very end. Thank you very much. And please do consider giving this one a thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do consider subscribing so you won't miss any more of my instant premieres or any more of my uploads. And so, till next time, catch you around then. Bye bye.